Hey, good morning or good afternoon to all of you guys. I'm saying good morning as I'm not sure in which part of the world you are, or good evening. Welcome to another topic of welcome to another blog that we're gonna talk about a bit today here at Varnish. The subject that we're gonna tackle today is cache invalidation. Caching, invalidation of the cache has always been one of those things that never actually received a final solution by any means. So as much as we've tried to tackle here at Varnish, we've only managed to come up with various small compromises here and there. So I'll move on and tell you a couple of things of who we are as a company. I would assume that most of you have heard of us, but mainly we are the company that stands behind the Varnish Cache project, which is the open source version of the cache. We have started to be a company in 2010 as an official company for all intents and purposes. And whereas today we have offices mainly all around the main nodes within the world, that is London, New York, Los Angeles, and Oslo and Stockholm in Scandinavia. We do have our tech side, our tech hub. It's located in Oslo. This is where most of our developers are found. On a day-to-day basis, we do spend our time in developing Varnish Cache, but on top of things, we do have some enterprise solutions as well, as we do have some to make some living of our own. All these solutions they comprise out of offline storages, SSL solutions, and especially support. There are a couple of bigger brands that have chosen to use us as a solution. Out of those, I'm just going to name Vimeo, Blizzard, or ESPN. But mainly 10% out of the bigger sites around the world are running on top of Varnish. So, long story short, this is who we are as a company. So I'll move on and tell you a few things of who am I, who are you actually listening to. So my name is Marius Măgureanu. Don't bother remembering my last name. I'm a software developer within the tools and platforms here at Varnish. Tools and platforms meaning anything but Varnish Cache. On my daily routine, I do Python and Golang coding, probably 75% Golang and the other side, and the other part of it Python. And anything else spare time wise, I guess it's all about cycling. So any Tour de France fans out there, please reach out. Yes, so getting to the problem at hand, to the topic of the day. So as I was mentioning in the beginning, cache invalidation is one of those things that you never actually get to solve, but the best you can do is coming up with a solution that would fit your needs. So it's rather complicated to come up and say that yes, I have this general bulletproof solution in this regards. Situations here being extremely visible in CDN's environments, whereas you see you can have multiple POPs all over the world. Maybe we're talking about huge media houses that would publish various articles about various news all throughout the day. So your typical use case will be when some new news will break the screens, and you really want to make this available for all your users. Having users both in Greenland or somewhere in Australia, ideally you would like to be sure that both the guy in Greenland and the Australia will get to see the same content, not the old news. Challenges here can reside at all levels, from the furthest backends through all your layers within your CDN, all the way to the edge. So how can you guarantee that your news will be that your new news will be updated all over? And how will you acknowledge that this new content has actually been propagated? Right. In this regard, Varnish does offer a couple of mechanisms to tackle the issue. So the main invalidation mechanism in Varnish, it's purge. Probably most of you are rather familiar with the term. It's this is a mechanism that will just pick up an object from the cache and free making available the space in the cache on demand. So that will this will happen on the time of the request. A second option would be banning. I would guess that banning deserves a bit of a wider discussion space, in the sense that that banning is a very smart is a very smart mechanism, but in the same time maybe not that efficient. You can look at banning as some sort of a filter. So when you're actually telling that, hey, I want to ban this specific object or this specific URLs, what you're actually telling that, hey, whenever anyone will ask for these specific URLs, only then please remove them from the cache. If no one will ask for your objects, those will remain in the cache, even if you have your even if you have your bans enabled. And then there is a third option which has suffered a few renamings throughout time. I chose to use the term of surrogate keys, but maybe some of you are more familiar with the term of #2, #ninja, or X-key. It's a very similar setup as with the purge. It's for all intents and purposes, this is a purge. The difference being is that you're just adding an extra tag to the object that you're trying to purge. And I'll give you an example here so you can tell a difference from the purge. Say you're an e-commerce operator and you're updating prices on and on. If you have a rich page, a rich object that probably consists out of 8 or 10 other objects, and you're just updating the price or the picture of the object, ideally you would like to update. You would like to remove from the cache all those 8 or 10 sub objects. So we'll just tag all of those with a specific key, and when time is needed, all the objects in the cache that belong to this specific key. Yeah. So as said, this is a use case that pretty much it's being used throughout media houses. And then lastly, I chose to go with this naming here, but it's not. This is not an invalidation mechanism at all. But in a worst case scenario, you can look at it like that. So typically a TTL, a time to leave for an object in Varnish, it's of 2 minutes. So given that you don't have any sort of other options in place, you will just reduce the TTL of your object. Mind you, this is a decision you have to take. You have to be very aware when taking this decision, because a lower TTL will imply a higher throughput against your backends. So the combination of these three, purges, bans, and surrogate keys, should provide enough of a flexibility in order to clear your cache as needed. The only problem is how do you make these mechanisms available throughout all your varnishes, because you don't want you really don't want your web app to know about every varnish out there. So ideally, you do want a central point that will have the responsibility and and the handling of distributing these invalidation mechanisms. Yeah, we started working on such a concentrator, if you may, and for some years now we have been using the super fast purger that's currently working in our Varnish administration console. If any of you guys are Varnish Plus customers, then you'll probably have seen the administration console. Within the administration console, and you'll be able to issue bans. And by using the superfast purger, you'll be able to issue purges. Now, this has been working pretty well, but it did raise a couple of limitations in the way that issuing bans and purges haven't really been done from a central point per se. And moreover, the superfast purger is limited strictly to doing purges, which is fine, because that was its sole purpose to begin with. But then again, as time went by, problems have started to be very convoluted. So we really had to come up with something a bit more flexible and more friendly in this regard. And we started sketching on a component called the broadcaster, which pretty much does what its name says. It will broadcast or it will relay an HTTP request against it. When we started talking and designing the broadcaster, another driver was VHA, the Varnish High Availability component. The idea being that these two components should complement each other, in the sense that VHA will fill in your cache and the broadcaster should clear it on demand. Hence, both of these two components will need to share the same input data source. The high availability, Varnish High Availability will use a configuration file in ini format, in which you'll just specify a set of nodes against which you want to replicate the cache, And at the same time, the broadcaster will use the same configuration file in order to know, okay, these are the nodes that I need to clear. The broadcaster is not has no limitation in terms of HTTP verbs. So for all practical reasons, you could use it to broadcast any sort of request. Currently, the only thing that we haven't really shake hands on was, should we broadcast request bodies or not? As is today, we don't do that. We will consider it in future versions. The coolest thing about it, which I'm very happy about, is that this component has no dependencies because it has been written in Golang. And from this perspective, Golang was just extraordinary. So if any of you have been using Golang before, you'll pretty much understand my happiness in this regard. Packaging-wise, deployment-wise, development-wise, it simply works like a charm. Right. So having said all this, I guess I can quickly fire up a couple of requests and show you guys how the actual broadcaster looks like. For this demo, I will use 4 Varnish instances, a running broadcaster, and I will have a very light Python server that will act as a backend to those 4 Varnishes. Now, for the sake of practicality of simplicity, I will run all of these locally on my machine. It's just easier in terms of handling the whole demo. So while I'm going to do this, you are more than welcome to drop questions in the questions tab, and if I'll be careful enough and I'll see your questions, I'll pick them along the way. Otherwise, we will be able to have we will have a Q&A session after the demo. Yep. So I'll switch to my terminal. Just need to move this a bit along here. Yeah. So before moving here, I've mentioned that that the broadcaster requires a configuration file that will tell, okay, which nodes it should broadcast against. So I'll just show you the configuration file that I'm using. It's this local conf. As you can see, this has an ini format file where I have defined two clusters, one in the US, which only 1 node, and then another cluster in Europe, which has 3 nodes. Well, all these clusters are on my PC, luckily. So I'll just fire up the broadcaster. And for the sake of the demo, I'll just enable debugging. Yeah. So at this point, I've got the broadcaster up and running, and here you will just see all my varnishes running around. I hope it's visible because you are getting a lot of processes here, root and child and children. But you'll see that all these Varnish instances are actually mapped to the configuration that you see here. So the story is that you as a client, you would from time to time you will want to clear the content of these caches. At the same time, I'll need to start my backend. Yeah. So at this point, I have 4 Varnishes running. I have my broadcaster, and the backend for my varnishes. I'll move to this other terminal, and I will just warm up the cache, and I will use the broadcaster to do that. So I will just issue a simple get call. The broadcaster runs by default on 8088, and I'll just do a foo bar. My Python backend is very friendly in this regard. You will take whatever endpoint. So this is what a very simple request against the broadcaster will yield. I'll briefly go through its output, as it helps a bit in taking a decision of whether a specific request has been successful or not. So the first tag tells if the whole broadcast has finished or not. It can happen that a specific request can take longer, but in the same time you will be able to check the status of a specific broadcast task, and this flag will tell you, well, am I done or not? You will afterwards get you will see the HTTP method that has been used, and then the HTTP response code from each of the nodes. In this case, all of them have succeeded, and you will also receive a success rate, which represents a percentage here. TS stands for the timestamp at which the time when the broadcast job has entered the broadcast handling queue. So this does not refer to when the broadcast has finished, but when the broadcast has started. And the last one being, of course, the URI. So if I'll just check against one of the Varnish instances, like switch to 2081, I will hit directly Varnish now. The H header should have been higher. So this is a bit funny. Oh yeah, my mistake. Varnish needs the way Varnish stores objects in the cache. It's by hashing their URI and the host. Just have to tell a specific host. And a space here. Right. I will be able to check Varnish again, telling a host. Right, and now we can see that I have an object. I have an object in the cache which has a specific age. Likewise, if we check another Varnish out of the 4, there is the age keeps going on. So let's try to purge all of these objects here, and we'll head back to the purger. So remember, this is the port on which the broadcaster listens to. Only this time, I'll use the purge. I'll use the purge verb. Empty space. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what the output of this request will tell me is that all of the purges have succeeded. Now, there is a small topic of discussion here, in the sense that what should the broadcaster return if, for instance, all of the purges fail? If for any reason you get anything else but 200 from your nodes. We did have some internal ping pong here on this subject, and for the time being, we have decided that we will not take any assumptions in the client's behalf, in the sense that even if all of these 4 specific requests would have failed, the broadcaster will return with a 200 to the client. But I will tell you, look, this is what happened to your nodes. So it will be up to you as a client to decide, was this a successful purge or not? Check a bit the questions if there's anything there. Carlos, I will read your question at the end. It's a bit of a longer one, but I will get to it. Sergey, we're using -- CFG. Right. So at this point, we've cleared our full bar from the cache. So if we should just go back and check the age header, pick one of those varnishes that we checked before. Yeah, the age is reset to 0. As I showed you a bit earlier, the configuration of the broadcaster accepts grouping or clustering. So if your intention is to purge only a specific cluster or a specific group, you can do that by telling which group to go against. So if I should purge again, well, in one sense it's purged already, but I can tell that I can cast against the US. So this will happen. The purge request will be done only against the specific node. Yeah, so this was a very simplistic scenario in which you go ahead and you purge a specific URL. We'll just, I guess I can do a small detail and show you guys the VCL that I'm using in my varnishes. So it's pretty much a by the book VCL in the sense that I'm using the X-key vmod. I will show you a bit further down the line how I'm using it. Afterwards, I have my VCL receive, in which I simply do a check if I'm receiving a purge request. If within the context of that purge request, is there an X-key purge header found? If so, I will handle it as an X-key. Otherwise, I will go ahead and handle it as a regular purge. Also, I will continue and check if my intention is of doing a ban. I will handle it accordingly. So let's go ahead and do a ban. So as said in the beginning, banning probably should be discussed as a separate topic into another talk, as it can grow quite big, and there has been a lot of discussions around the subject. But again, now I'm deviating a bit. If at any point you guys would be interested in strictly in banning, please say so, and maybe we can have another webinar in this regard. So the way you will use banning is sort of applying a filter in telling, okay, these are the kind of URLs or objects that I would like to have clear. So if you'll see into my VCL again, the filter that I'm applying here, well, I'm using the term filter for the ease of explanations. You see, my banning here will be based on the host and the URL. So it's a rather generous filter. Not that very smart from a banning perspective, but for demo it's more than enough. So Let's warm up a bit the cache again. And I'll do this by using the broadcaster again. Foo bar parse. So I have it already a couple of times. And I can check again directly one Varnish instance. I'll pick the second one. Oopsie. Yeah. You see I have here an object for sitting out for a while now. And I will issue a ban again using the broadcaster. Right. Again, you'll see here that the method used was banning, and all the varnishes have returned with a 200. So, should we check again one of those varnishes? Go against the same one. The age is 0. Now, if I had opened a varnish log for this specific instance, you would have seen that you would have seen some more details in the way of how it has how the banning has been received and how it has been cleared afterwards. I'll move a bit to the other to the other terminal here, and you'll see here that the broadcaster is rather rich in debugging, as it will tell you that it has received a ban request from the client, and these are the ban requests that have been issued against its nodes. So the ordering of these requests is never guaranteed because everything happens asynchronous. So up until now, I've just shown you how to broadcast a purge and a ban, which for our practical reason is pretty much the same thing from a client's perspective. Moving further, I guess I could show you a bit the usage of the X key. If any of you have used surrogate keys up until now, will probably find this interesting. But when using X key, you need to be aware that the backend has that your backend has some responsibilities here as well. In the way that the backend has to issue an X key header in order to mark the objects that will eventually enter the cache. So, because from the opposite end of things, the client, when calling the broadcaster, will need to know, okay, hey, please clear all the objects with this specific tag. So for this, I'll just show you how my backend app looks like. This small Python server. And right, you see, I have my get handler, and I have a small method that will just set some headers. The set headers method will be called on each of these endpoint handlers, be get methods, heads, or posts. And I would like you to pay attention on the lines 12 and 13. On line 12, I'm simply doing a small hack for my just for myself to tell that, hey, I would like to use the X key header now. And on line 13, it's where my backend let X key header with a very dumb value of QWERTY. Right. So what will happen is that my backend will, anytime when I'll be accessing an endpoint starting with /X key, I'll always populate the response with an X key header. And it's the same QWERTY value that I will further use in order to clear it. So let's warm up a bit the cache again. We'll be using the broadcaster again. But I need to make sure that I'll get myself populated with an X key. If, for instance, I'll be hearing one of these Varnish instances, you see, my backend will report the X key header. Likewise, if I'll hit any other of these Varnishes. So again, I have my X key header here. They have some age. And now I would like to make sure that all the objects with this specific X key will be cleared. So I'll head back to the broadcaster and I will tap purge. And this is going to get weird because if I recall correct, this is the header that I have. And I'll be telling the value that the backend header. Right. Again, the broadcast, all the Varnish nodes seem to have returned with 200. So if I'm going to check one of the Varnishes again, the age should be 0. And yay, my X key worked. H0 is 0 again. Yeah. So briefly, extremely briefly, this is how the broadcaster works like. There's also besides the main port on top of which the broadcast works, there's also a sort of an administration port in which you'll be able to interrogate the status of specific jobs, or probably have a look at what's the current configuration that the broadcaster is running on. And then that's being done on top of another port, and by default that's 8089. And what you can do is have a look at your current configuration. And you will see that I have my Europe cluster and my US cluster. The tag that you see on top, that's async, telling that telling that currently the broadcaster runs in asynchronous mode. Now, there should not be made a confusion here, because all the broadcast calls are being asynchronous. But this tag will simply be true or false from a client's perspective, in the sense that if it's false, if you're running in asynchronous, if you're running in synchronous mode, you as a client will issue the broadcast request, wait for the entire broadcast to finish, and return. If running asynchronous, what happens is you will issue a broadcast request, and the broadcaster returns immediately with a job ID. And then it's up to you as a client to interrogate based on that job ID to see has the actual job finished or not. This may have potential use cases in rather large rather large CDNs. So I'll quickly kill my broadcaster and restart it in asynchronous mode. I will check again the configuration, and this time you'll see that asynchronous is set on. So let's go ahead and broadcast anything. .88 and all purge. Right. So this is the example where where the broadcast request has immediately returned, just telling you that yes, your job has been accepted, and this is the ID of your job. So if there's some heavy work taking place over there, you'll be able to interrogate it by asking the management port and check the status and pass along its ID. Oh, oopsie. Yeah. If for any reason the job would have still been working, then you would have received 202 on and on and on until all of the broadcasts would have returned. So I suppose that, long story short, this is what the broadcaster is all about. And lucky for me, it didn't crash while using it. The demo effect hasn't kicked in yet. So as next steps, we do have some ideas on the plate, and probably this will be also driven by the output that we'll be getting from the community. But what we're mainly interested in is in stack broadcasts, in the way that in larger setups, I want to be able to broadcast against the broadcaster. So yeah, try to picture yourself a huge tree of broadcasters that will keep on broadcasting from one to another, and then the initial broadcast caller would receive a flattened output of the entire request. It's an idea that we're playing with. Secondly, we will probably decide to broadcast request body, but again, this is an open issue. We'll have to see, and then maybe add some level of security, some sort of authentication. But this is again pros and cons, because typically typically the broadcaster will already run into into an environment that's already behind some authentication or authorization schemes. So, but again, this is an open issue. Yeah, yes, and another thing I forgot to mention, pretty cool probably, we have added a light UI. It's very light, but hey, it does the job. If for any reason there should be someone that wants to broadcast from from the browser, you will be able to do so. I could probably have a sneak peek. If my browser will allow me so. So briefly, this is this is how it's this UI looks like. By the time when we wrote it, I found it to be very neat. So have a small app in the browser that will allow you to do purges here and there. This was probably the trigger point when you thought, but it would be nice to have some authentication in this scenario, right? But again, this is just one neat point. So I guess it's time for questions. And Carlos, I will try to read your question here. So give me 10 seconds, guys. Well, so a single instance will it will pretty much relay the request against all your configured instances. But yeah, so the answer to your question, Carlos, is yes. It simply sends all the requests against your VCP instances. Well, the configured ones. Heather, yes, you will receive all the code examples, both my server and the VCL and the request examples. Thank you, Carlos. So if there are no other questions, I guess this would pretty much conclude the topic of the day. However, before closing it, I'm just derailing a bit again against the banning, the topic that we had. So if at any point you guys think having a talk about banning is worthwhile, drop us a text, let us know in any way, so we could have a talk in these regards. Only 2 or 5 minutes around banning, it's rather few, given its possibilities. Right, but if no other questions pop up, then I will just thank you for your attendance and talk to you all next time. Thank you, guys. See you.